Penguin Random House Audio presents The Shards. This is the author, Bret Easton Ellis. For No One. Do you remember back in old L.A., when everybody drove a Chevrolet? Whatever happened to the boy next door, the suntanned, crew-cut, all-American male? Beach baby, the first class. If you want to keep a secret, you must also hide it from yourself. 1984, George Orwell. The Shards. Many years ago, I realized that a book, a novel, is a dream that asks itself to be written in the same way we fall in love with someone. The dream becomes impossible to resist. There's nothing you can do about it. You finally give in and succumb, even if your instincts tell you to run the other way, because this could be, in the end, a dangerous game. Someone will get hurt. For a few of us, the first ideas, images, the initial stirrings can prompt the writer to automatically immerse themselves in the novel's world, its romance and fantasy, its secrets. For others, it can take longer to feel this connection more clearly, ages to realize how much you needed to write the novel or love that person, to relive that dream, even decades later. The last time I thought about this book, this particular dream, and telling this version of the story, the one you're listening to now, the one you just began, was almost 20 years ago, when I thought I could handle revealing what happened to me and a few of my friends at the beginning of our senior year at Buckley in 1981. We were teenagers, superficially sophisticated children who really knew nothing about how the world actually worked. We had the experience, I suppose, but we didn't have the meaning, at least not until something happened that moved us into a state of exalted understanding. When I first sat down to write this novel, a year after the events had taken place, it turned out that I couldn't deal with revisiting this period, or any of those people I knew, and the terrible things that befell us, including, most crucially, what had actually happened to me. In fact, without even writing a word, I shut the idea of the project down almost as soon as I began it. I was 19. Even without picking up a pen or sitting at my typewriter, only gently remembering what happened proved too unnerving in that moment. And I was at a place in my life that didn't need the added stress, and I forced myself to forget about that period, at least for a while. And it wasn't hard to erase the past in that moment. But the urge to write the book returned when I left New York. After living there for over 20 years, the East Coast was where I escaped almost immediately upon graduation, fleeing the trauma of my last year at high school, and found myself living back in Los Angeles, where those events from 1981 had taken place, and where I felt stronger, more resolved about the past, and that I was capable of steeling myself from the pain of it all and entering the dream. But this turned out not to be the case then either, and after typing up a few pages of notes about the events that happened in the autumn of 1981, when I thought I had numbed myself with half a bottle of Ocho in order to keep proceeding, letting the tequila stabilize my trembling hands, I experienced an anxiety attack so severe that it sent me to the emergency room at Cedars-Sinai in the middle of that night. If we want to connect the act of writing with the metaphor of romance, then I had wanted to love this novel, and it seemed to be finally offering itself to me, and I was so tempted. But when it came time to consummate the relationship, I found myself unable to fall into the dream. This happened when I was writing specifically about the Trawler, a serial killer who had been haunting the San Fernando Valley starting in the late spring of 1980, and then announcing their presence more strongly in the summer of 1981, and who was frighteningly somehow connected to us. And a wave of stress so severe crashed over me that night, I began making notes. I actually moaned with fear from the memories, and I collapsed, retching up the tequila I'd been gulping down. The Xanax I kept in the nightstand by my bed was no help. I swallowed 3 and knew they weren't going to do anything quickly enough. In that moment, I was sure I was about to die. I dialed 911 and told the operator I was having a heart attack, and then fainted. The landline I was calling from, this was in 2006, I was 42, I lived alone, alerted them as to where the location was, and an alarmed doorman from the front desk of the high-rise I lived in escorted the EMTs to the 11th floor. My apartment was unlocked by the doorman, and they found me on the floor in the bedroom. I regained consciousness in an ambulance as it sped along San Vicente Boulevard towards Cedars-Sinai, a short distance from the Doheny Plaza, where I lived. And after I was wheeled into the emergency room, prone on a stretcher, and had reoriented myself as to what had happened, I became embarrassed. The Xanax had kicked in, and I was calm, and I knew there was nothing physically wrong with me. I knew the panic attack was directly related to the memories I had of the trawler, and more specifically of Robert Mallory. A doctor checked me out. I was basically fine, but the hospital wanted me to stay the night so they could perform a battery of tests, including running an MRI. And my primary physician agreed, reminding me over the phone that my health insurance would cover almost all of the stay. But I needed to get home, and opted out of whatever test they wanted to administer, because if I had stayed at Cedars that night, I was sure I'd slip into madness, knowing that what happened to me had nothing to do with my body or any malady I may or may not have harbored. It was a reaction simply connected to memory, to the past, and conjuring that awful year, to Robert Mallory, and the trawler, and Matt Kellner, and Susan Reynolds, and Tom Wright, and Deborah Schaefer, as well as the darkened tunnel I was traveling through at 17. After that night, I abandoned the project and instead wrote 2 other books during the following 13 years, and it wasn't until 2020 that I felt I could begin the Shards. Or the Shards had decided that Bret was ready because the book was announcing itself to me, and not the other way around. I hadn't reached out to the book because I spent so many years pushing myself away from the dream, from Robert Mallory, from that senior year at Buckley. So many decades spent pushing away from the trawler, and Susan, and Tom, and Deborah, and Ryan, and what happened to Matt Kellner. I had relegated the story to the dark corner of the closet, and for many years this avoidance worked. I didn't pay as much attention to the book, and it stopped calling out to me. But sometime during 2019, it began climbing its way back, pulsing with a life of its own, wanting to merge with me, expanding into my consciousness in such a persuasive way that I couldn't ignore it any longer. Trying to ignore it had become a distraction. This particular timing had coincided with the fact that I wasn't writing screenplays anymore, that I had decided at a certain point to stop chasing that game. A decade of being well compensated for TV pilots and scripts for movies that would mostly never be made. And I briefly wondered if there was a connection between the book beckoning to me and the new lack of interest in writing for Hollywood. It didn't matter. I had to write the book because I needed to resolve what happened. It was finally time. The spark for my renewed interest in the novel was initiated by a brief moment years after that anxiety attack landed me in Cedars. I'd seen a woman. I was going to say a girl, but she wasn't any longer. She was a woman in her mid-50s, my age, on the corner of Holloway and La Cienega in West Hollywood. She was standing on the sidewalk outside the Pally House Hotel, wearing sunglasses, a phone pressed against her ear, waiting for a car. And even though this was a much older version of the girl I used to know when we were in high school, it was unmistakably her. I knew it even though I hadn't seen her in almost 40 years. She was still effortlessly beautiful. I had just made a left turn onto Holloway and was stopped in traffic when I noticed the figure on the deserted sidewalk beneath the umbrella at the valet stand. She was maybe 20 feet away from me. Instead of the happy surprise at seeing an old friend, I was frozen with a sheet of dread. It draped over me immediately, and I went ice cold. The glimpse of this woman in the flesh caused the fear to return, and it started swallowing everything, just like it had in 1981. She was a reminder that it had all been real, that the dream had actually happened, that even though 4 decades had passed since we last saw each other, we were still bound by the events of that fall. I didn't suddenly pull over to the side of Holloway near the mouth of the garage of the CVS across the street from the Pally House and present myself to the woman, exclaim surprise, get out of the car and offer her an embrace, marvel at how beautiful she still looked. I had successfully avoided contact with any of my classmates from our senior year on social media. with only a few having reached out to me.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?